Welcome, good morning. Thank you for getting out of bed this early to come spend an hour with me. I appreciate it. I will try to hold your attention and make you happy that you've done this to yourself. Is that the right way to say that? Good morning. I'm Cary. The presentation that I'll spend the next 2.5 hours doing for you is called The Perils of Describe. Oh yeah, good. You're listening. Excellent. It'll only be an hour.
It wouldn't be long enough.
Oh, Bryn, bless your heart. Keep filling out those evals. The Perils of Describing Performance Improvements. And this is one of those topics. I think there are two reasons that people go to conferences. Two really productive. There are probably three. There are always three. But the two that I'm going to highlight for you are, one, ostensibly, you're supposed to show up at work next week with new stuff. Right, they give you one of these and one of these, and then you hear things you've never heard before, and then you write that down, you go back, and you're like, see that it was worth it. I know new stuff now. The second one is that you reacquire information that you already knew, already believed, but now you have maybe a better explanation so that you can be more compelling when you get home. And you can say all those things that you've been saying before, but better, so maybe people will listen now because you heard somebody else say it in a way that now you have an intersection of ways to explain something that now your colleagues will believe more readily. I think this presentation will give you a little bit of both of those things. I think that there are a couple things in this presentation that will actually legitimately surprise you. So that's my tease as we go forward. This is what I've spent my time doing the last 20 or 30 years, and I just noticed that the colors are really washed out. I apologize that I didn't notice that before when the AV guy was here, but I'm not sure there's anything we can do. Unless, Eric, you go, oh, yodel or something, and then the guy will come. I think it's worth saturating it a bit, because I'm worried that some of the slides may not be that great. Anyway, I spent 10 years in a week at Oracle, and then I started trying my hand building businesses, and I've built a couple, and now I work for Accenture with 275,000 of my closest friends. All right, the graph of what we will do today is this. The presentation title, The Perils of Describing Performance Improvements, is of course the root node on this graph. And there are really two things that we're going to talk about. Of course, we're going to talk about describing, that's our verb, but the two things we're going to talk about describing are simply enough the past and the future. So that's easy so far. Now, in the past, there are two subnodes. I want to talk about how to describe the performance improvements of individual tasks, which I'll define. And I also want to describe the perils of describing performance improvements for whole systems. And thank you very much. I just wonder if you could saturate the color a little bit more. I don't know if that's possible, but when I got to here, I started to worry a little bit because it's very washed out.
I mean, that would have to change probably the projector.
Yeah,
If you have any extra, I could try to dim the lights. It's have to focus there.
Yeah, now it's. If the best we can do is focus with those colors, I think we'll be okay.
That's really about it. Let me see if I can do the right.
I don't find that incredibly well focused yet. You mind if I like?
That's
Is that the best we got? Ooh, that's better.
no, that's.
There we go.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
You're an eye doctor in the house.
Should I not drive myself home when I get to the airport? All right. So the right-hand side of this is probably not going to be surprising to you. It's the same two nodes at the bottom. So we're really going to be talking about four things today: how to describe individual tasks in the past and in the future, and then whole systems in the past and the future. So let's start with the past. It seems like it would be easy to explain something that has already happened, but that's kind of the point of being here today. So to remind you which node of the graph we're on, we're going to be on the far bottom left, describing an individual speed up in the past. So I'll just start off with a quiz. The quiz is if something, before you mess around with it, takes 10 minutes, and then you fix it, And then after you're done, it takes 3 seconds. Then what can you say about what you've done? Right. This is multiple choice, multiple guess, as my old teachers used to say. So is it A, that it went from 10 minutes to 3 seconds? Is it B, that you've reduced duration by 99.5%? And here's the arithmetic behind that. It's the 600 original minus the 3, and then divide that by the original 600, so you get 0.995. Or is it C, you've made it go 200 times faster, and the way we've calculated that is we've taken the 600 and divided it by the 3. Or is it D, that you've made it go 20,000% faster, which is the same arithmetic except we're multiplying by 100%, which everybody knows is the value 1. And you can multiply anything by 1 and it remains the same quantity as before. So which of those do you like?
C. A.
You like A? You like C? Yes, sir?
All of them.
You like all of them? I like most of them. Here's my explanation for how I would answer this question. I mean, A, yeah, absolutely. It happened exactly like we said, and that's truthful and 100% complete. And there are a couple of things that I really like about A. And the main one is that the numbers 10 minutes and 3 seconds show up in the answer. Those quantities don't show up anywhere in these answers down here. For example, B is fine. It's the response time perspective of how much did we reduce. But there's nothing in B that says, yeah, this thing took a century and a quarter before, and then it took an eighth of a century after, or whatever the numbers would have to be. You have no clue whether we're talking hundreds of seconds or hundreds of millions of minutes or fractions of seconds. You just have a percentage to look at. C is fine too. C is really the throughput perspective. You know, if you're concerned about we need to do 100 times more of this thing and it won't fit when it runs in 600 seconds. It doesn't fit in our uptime window or whatever your daily work window is. Then you probably care about, well, I made it go 200 times faster. It only needed to go 100 times faster. I made it go 200 times faster. So C is fine. C is not a lie. Although C does conceal the 600 and the 3, just like B did. D, I'm going to argue, is sort of awful. And I'll give some reasons for that as we go. The first thing I want to mention, and this is a slide that I added last night, I just think it's cool. Just like pi and e are symbols that represent a number that can't be fully specified on a slide. I just don't have room to put all the digits of pi here, but it's 3.1415926535897993, and it keeps going. And e is 2.71828182845904559, and it just keeps going. Well, the percent symbol represents a fixed quantity as well. It's simply a symbol that represents the quantity 0.01. So if you've got kids in school that are struggling with percentages, just remind them that just like pi or e, percent is a symbol that represents a number, and that number happens to be 1/100th. So when we say 100%, we actually mean the quantity 1. If we say 0.3%, then we actually mean the quantity 0.0, some number of zeros and a 3. Because percent represents the quantity 0.01. Nothing magical about it. Now, back to the real program. There are really two ways to express speed up. If B stands for before, and A is the duration after, so before and before is bigger than after, meaning in our performance realm that when we fix something, it runs in less time afterwards. So B is greater than A, or in other words, A is less than B. And both these quantities are bigger than 0, so we haven't made it completely go away. Then this thing, this x that I've chosen to represent how many times faster are we going, is simply B divided by A. Before this was 600, and after it was 3, so 600 divided by 3 gave us our x, and that's how we said that after is 200 times faster than before. I know I'm going way too slow for you, but this picks up here in a minute. This is a little more of a complicated expression, but you can say that the percentage by which something has been improved is the difference between before and after divided by before as a baseline. So for example, if something took 10 seconds before and it takes 2 seconds after, the difference 10 minus 2 is 8, and 8 over 10 is 80%. I've gotten rid of 80% of the original amount of time. That's what this P represents. Everybody good? Now, this times 100% thing is exactly multiplying by 1. So if instead of saying it is 0.8 faster than before, I can say it's 80% faster than before. Most people seem to resonate with that a little bit better. Now, are these definitions mine or are they somebody else's? And I'll take you down a trip into the woods. I think that's what this picture is supposed to represent. Nothing? Okay. I had one of these one time. Have you ever had one of these? The old HP 19B. I keep accidentally manipulating this mic. The HP 19B had this function called percent change, percent %ch. And the way that it defined percent change is exactly this way here. You would have we have these little soft function key buttons here. They're hard buttons, but they mean different things in different modes on the calculator. And when you go into the some kind of change mode, I remember there was a little label across the bottom of the screen where you would type in the old value and the new value, and then you'd hit percent %ch and it would tell you the percent change. Or if you knew the percent change you wanted and you knew the new value you wanted, you could type those in and then press old, and it would calculate what old would need to be in order to make the percent change what you had requested for it to be. It was quite a nice little deal for something that was made back in the 70s. But that's exactly my definition P on the prior page. The percentage of change is exactly this definition, old minus new, divided by old times 100%. A couple of examples. If before is 100 and after is 1, then that's a 99% reduction in response time. You could also say that after is 100 times faster than before, because we simply divide before by after and we get 100. On the right-hand side, another example, if before is 10 and after is 8, then this is a 1.25 or 125% increase if you go back to that D thing on the prior quiz that I told you I really don't like. But basically, it's 1.25 times faster, and we've eliminated 20% of the time going from 10 to 8. I think by now we're probably all in the same groove. Okay. Of course, P can be explained in terms of X. So my P definition is B minus before minus after over before, which if we divide, we can come up with it's 1 minus A over B. Well, B over A is the same thing as X. So A over B is the reciprocal of X. And if we continue to do some algebraic manipulations, we find that the percentage of improvement is the times faster minus 1 divided by the times faster. So if you happen to have 1, you can move to the other. So if you happen to have X, you can find P, and if you happen to have B and A, of course, you can find X. Here's an example of that. If before is 100 and after is 2, then the thing is 50 times faster. We've reduced the amount of time by 98%. And if we use the formula P is equal to X minus 1 over X, which is what we've derived on the prior page, then we can also say that it's 50 minus 1 over 50, which in fact happens to be identical to the 0.98 that we calculated the other way. It's all math. It's always going to work. Are we still good? Excellent. So one thing I want you to notice is that P is always less than 100. The way that we've defined it, you cannot have a P value greater than 1. You can't eliminate more than 100% of your response time, is the practical statement of that. So there's a little bit of proof here. If X is equal to B over A, and if A is between 0 and B, then X is automatically greater than or equal to 1, and P is automatically between 0 and 1. It might actually be 0, but if both of these numbers are greater than 0, then it can't actually be as much as 1, but it can be nearly 1. It can be a lot of 9s, for example. So one thing I'd ask you to do, one of the little morals of my presentation here is please don't express X as a percentage. P as a percentage is fine, but please don't express X as a percentage, although some people do. This is an ad from a long, long time ago. You can tell by the thing that people are advertising speeding up. Please don't, or how to speed up Windows XP by 1,000%. Well, if you're thinking in terms of P and X, you're probably going to start to wonder what that means. And of course, if P is never greater than 1 and 1,000% is greater than 1, then it can't be a P value. So it can't be we're eliminating 1,000% of our response time. That just doesn't make any sense because you can only eliminate up to 100% of your response time. So it must be an X. right? And I think I've got a slide that says something like that. What does it even mean? And if you say something is 1,000% faster, it can't mean the p thing. It might mean that x is equal to something expressed as a percentage, which means that really it's 90% faster, not 1,000% faster. But I'm really not even sure. And certainly 1,000 sounds better than 90. I mean, that sounds a lot more fantastic than this does. And by the way, I picked an old ad. It's not that you have to go back 2 decades to find this mistake. I just was a little more tactful by not picking a more modern one. So we really don't know what the hell they're talking about, and the sense that I get from reading the ad is that perhaps they don't know what the hell they're talking about either. And that's the thing that leads to the next conclusion, is to say what sounds better even though it's misleading. And I've been very tactful and diplomatic in how I wrote this. It's probably not your best pathway towards more credibility. No, the kids have a word for it. But it's saying something just because it sounds better, even if it's misleading, it's probably not how you want to represent yourself. So whether you say X or P, I really would advise you that it's sensible to also mention B and A, before and after. This was 98% faster. You really don't have to mention B and A as long as you say something like that. It's 98% faster. It used to take 100 seconds. We can figure the rest out. It's 98% faster. Now it only takes 2 seconds. You can figure the rest out. Or you can simply say it used to be 100, now it's 2. Look at that. So that's a little bit of discourse on how to explain the improvements of something that you've done that have already happened in the past. Now let's move on to how do you explain the behavior of a whole system that's changed sometime in the past. So here we go, another quiz to begin the section. Imagine that something before took 15 minutes. You replaced a major component in the system, in this case the storage area network, and afterwards it took 10 minutes. So what can you say? Can you say A, the system went from 15 minutes to 10 minutes? Can you say B, you made the system 1.5 times faster? The math is 15 divided by 10 is equal to 1.5. Or can you say C, you reduced the system durations by 33.3%? What do you think? Which of these do you like? You like all three? B and C? D. What's D? What do you like about it? What's D going to say? I'm hovering over the go to D button. Predict what it's going to say. Yes, sir.
You freed up 5 minutes of the processor.
We reduced 5 minutes of execution time.
I like that. I like that. There is no D on the slide. That's a trick I employed. I knew this would happen, so that's why I didn't. No, I'm just kidding. Let me tell you my opinion about these three, just like I did the other ones. Actually, no, no, and no. You remember that thing I said at first about you're probably going to get something today that's a little different than what you expected? This is one of those things. The problem I have with all three of these statements, and that I don't have with either of your statements, by the way, you guys fixed the problem that I'm getting ready to complain about in your suggestions. But here are my suggestions. I don't like any of these three because of this word here. There's really no such thing as a system when you think about it in the terms that I've asked you to think about it. We replaced the saying something took 15 minutes, now something takes 10 minutes. What you really need to be asking is, what is this thing? Because not everything on the system takes 15 minutes to begin with. Well, I mean, maybe you have a completely homogeneous system that has exactly and only one transaction that it ever executes. And I've seen such systems. Verizon had one. They had a whole big old Sun box that had 32 CPUs in it that only ever executed one SQL statement ever. It was their fraud detection unit. So it only ever ran one SQL statement. But most systems aren't like that. Most systems are kind of is the right word? I have Brennan in the room. Is hegemony the right word? It seems like that should be the right word, even though I have no idea what it means. But it's like I don't know. Hodgepodge may be the real word that I'm thinking of. But most systems run lots of different things. And if one of those things takes 15 minutes before and it takes 10 minutes after, well, then you can't paint the whole system with that. Everything on the system takes 10 minutes now. So you might have made something go 33% faster, but not everything. That's my problem with it. And let me show you what this looks like on the inside. If you look at the data a certain way, then this comes really easily to you. It just naturally occurs in your brain, whereas the way that I got you to that ABC slide where I tricked you into saying, yeah, I like A, I like B, and I like C, and then suddenly I said, no, you shouldn't like any of them. Well, if you think about systems this way, you wouldn't have liked any of them to begin with. And that's the transformation that I'm trying to cause by doing this presentation. So imagine that we have the famous TPS report, and it runs 1.5 times faster and represents a 33.3% savings in response time. Maybe it's this table here I call a profile. A profile is a tabular account of response time, which is broken down on some, or I shouldn't say broken down, it's decomposed by some useful dimension. And the dimension that I've chosen here is call name, so like subroutine call. And apparently on this system, before we were spending 450 seconds on disk I/O and 450 seconds on other, which accounts for the 900 seconds I said this thing takes to begin with. Because I said 15 minutes, and I believe 15 times 60 is 900. And after, what we've done with the SAN has been remarkable. We've made the SAN go 3 times faster, which is a 66.7, it's a 2/3 savings, right? Out of 450 units of time before, we're taking 150 units after. We've saved 2 out of 3 units of time on the SAN, but we haven't made any changes to anything else because all we did was manipulate the SAN. So the other number after is the same as the other number was before. Now we re-add, the other number still takes 450 seconds, and the SAN visits now only take 150 seconds, and that's how we come to our 10-minute figure, 600. But you can start to sense here that if we had other transactions on the system, like perhaps book order, which before only took 4 seconds, and spent 3.7 on other and maybe only 0.3 on disk I/O, well, speeding up the disk I/O by a factor of 3 only leaves us with a 0.2 second improvement in total response time. So you can see how that response time is really the sum of an array of lines, which are themselves call counts times latencies, which I've left out the call counts because that's not what we're focused on today. But you can tell that if I increase the performance of my SAN, I'm really only going to have impact on one of these lines in the profiles for each of the things that runs. And I've simplified the profiles by lumping everything that's not the component we upgraded into this category called other. Does that make sense? So if you go about advertising that everything on the system is a time and a half faster, well, the people that run book order are going to be pretty disappointed. In fact, they're going to be pretty suspicious, I think, of the next thing you say, because the last thing you said simply isn't true from their perspective. Right? Now, especially, and we're going to get to the predicting business in a minute, but my God, it's hard enough to talk about things that happen in the rearview mirror. How hard is predicting going to be? Right? So that's why I have this presentation. Is it okay so far? Are we having fun? Good. Good. All right, so I've calculated the numbers here. This is only a 5% improvement. It's 1.1 times faster. So also, I wondered if you noticed, we have a 3 times faster disk, and it doesn't mean, and I'm sorry about the build, but it doesn't mean that we have a 3 times faster experience. Do you ever have that problem? Hey everybody, we're buying a new thing next week, and it's 3 times faster than the old thing. Now, if you stop there, what's everybody at the water cooler going to think? Right on. Everything's going to be 3 times faster next week. Well, that one line in your profile is going to be 3 times faster, but as I've already shown you, that one line in your profile may represent a lot of your time. It may not represent much. You remember Amdahl's law? Amdahl's law says that you can only speed up something with an improvement in proportion to how much the system used the thing you improve. And that's what this is. So 3 times faster disk, even this thing doesn't run 3 times faster. It's only a time and a half faster, and this is nowhere close to 3 times faster. So that leads us to the observation that can be expressed in a question. How can a component upgrade have different effects upon different executions? And the thing is that your system serves probably millions of distinct experiences over the years, and each one of these experiences uniquely responds to a given change. Here are a couple more. These are a little more blown out. I've got call counts and means and mins and maxes, and this is literal output from a piece of software that my company called MethodR sells. And this is an actual somebody's response time. Somebody actually waited 22.4 hours for some batch job to finish, and it spent 76.6% of its time executing these function calls in Oracle called db file sequential read. And the read calls were reasonably, not great, 5.9 milliseconds apiece. But anyway, that's a longer other story. But here's another thing that ran on the same system that only took 1,500 seconds, and it had nowhere near the profile that this thing did. This thing's abated by reading, and this thing's abated by network traffic. 90,000 network I/O calls that took pretty good wide area network latencies. So these are two things running on the same system that have completely different profiles, completely different execution characteristics. And so, of course, if we upgraded the SAN on this machine, it would make a huge difference. If we upgrade the SAN on this machine, it's going to make some difference that's confined to less than 3.89 seconds at best. So to your users, your system is not CPU, memory, and disk. It's a probably small collection of tasks that they execute every day. There may be somebody in your organization that only ever runs one thing. I only ever touch this machine when I run that one report. And if you say something like, everything's going to be 3 times faster, or if you say, my disk is going to be 3 times faster, that person in his head is going to think, my report's going to be 3 times faster. So you have to watch out how you communicate that information. So let me make sure that I haven't not said something that I should have said about this slide. So it's really common that when you upgrade a component on your system, you have all sorts of different perceptions of how useful that improvement was. And you got to watch out for that, because what if the order fulfillment staff are the most politically powerful people in your company who control your budget, for example. And you go around saying stuff like, yeah, we're going to make things 33% faster. And then you do your thing, and they don't even notice on this one, and they barely notice on the other one. Well, you haven't lied, except you sort of did, because you weren't careful in how you expressed what the performance improvement was going to be. So, that officially, by the way, is a one-word slide. Bryn, this is what a one-word slide looks like.
It's got an ellipsis after it.
Yes, but that's not a word, unless you say ellipsis, and E-L-L-I-P, So, the reason I complained about the slide earlier is because it's got the word system all over it, and now we know that a system really doesn't exist. So what we need to do instead is to say, before 15 minutes for the TPS report, we need to scope the thing that we say so that it's true. Because the things we say should be true. I should have said that at the beginning, that that's one of the fundamental assumptions that I'm making, and I realize now that I haven't said that. So I hope that the things I say are true. Okay. So we can say that the TPS report went from 15 minutes to 10 minutes. We can say that you made the TPS report 1.5 times faster. We can say that you reduced the TPS report duration by 33.3%, and all these things are good and fine and pure and whole and true. How about this one? You made your system 1.5 times faster. Well, I've yelled at you for the last 6 minutes that that's not true, and hopefully you believe now that absolutely not. Can you say that and maintain this faithfulness to the things that you say being true? That's one that's an assumption that we make sometimes, but then we surround ourselves sometimes with these sort of predatorial people who may not operate under that assumption. The world's just coming clear to me. Okay, are we still fine? We're still talking about the past. We're still talking about the easy stuff. Now, I've used the word task a couple times, and by task I mean a code path with a business name which a user can execute or experience many times. So you have to say performance improvement for which task. You just have to. Yes. Whoa, what? What? Okay, let me ask you this. You saw me double take, and it's because I forgot a subtle change that I'm going to introduce on the next slide. Why, when I say that? It sounds sensible, and I nodded, and I gave you all this sort of, yes, I believe this to the bottom of my heart, and then suddenly I surprised myself with the, but. What do you think the but is?
Task can have some heterogeneous build-up itself. So one execution of the task, experience of the task could have a lot of this and not much of that.
Yes, Perfect. So the word that I need to add is this word here, execution. Because the same task, remember, task is a piece of code path. The book order task at 8 a.m. may have a lot of disk I/O. Cache isn't warmed up yet, whatever. The book order task at 2 p.m. may have a lot of buffer busy wait. Cache is really warmed up, whatever. So it's not necessarily that when you execute the same code path over and over again, especially by different people at different locations all over the world, that necessarily will all the profiles be homogeneous. Ooh, ouch, right? It's probable that your profiles for a given task are going to fall into 2, maybe 3 categories at most, but they don't have to. It could be that every time you execute something, it's like a whole new world. All right, so let's now go to the hard one. Let's go to where we talk about the future. It's about half the time, and I think we've got about half the material left. So let's talk about predicting an individual speedup. Here we go. Imagine a pie chart, which you can obtain from various tools on the Oracle or in the Oracle ecosystem. Let's imagine that your system DB time looks like this. It's what's that? Approximately, I'm going to say 64% of your total time is CPU on your system. That latch free is a big old chunk. It looks like almost a quarter, but not quite. We've got some other things going on that are smaller. So let me ask you, on a system whose DB time looks like that, how much faster is payroll going to run if you double the CPU speed? So we've got CPUs that can do this many gigahertz, and we're going to buy CPUs that can do that many times 2 that has a clock speed of that many times 2 gigahertz. Can process instructions twice as fast. There are no tricks. I'm not trying to trick you in how I say the CPU is twice as fast. Just imagine the CPU is like whatever metric you use, it really is twice as powerful and can run things twice as quickly. So how fast would you expect payroll to run after we upgrade the CPU? I know what you're thinking. Go. I say it again. I'm sorry.
What is payroll doing?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. And I know you all know that. You're all thinking, would you please just go on? We get the trick now. It looks, the trick is, I want you to say 32 because I told you that the blue thing was 64. And surely if CPU's twice as fast, then your pie chart, 32% of it's going to go away, and payroll is going to be 32% faster. But not necessarily. In fact, not even probably. So here's why. Your system DB time looking like that does not necessarily mean that your payroll and your book order and your pick order and your find part number profiles all look like that. Because this pie chart here is really, it's a graphical representation of one of these profile tables that I showed you before. And there really isn't any such thing as a profile for a system. I mean, you could make a profile for a system by looking at VLAR system event and all the system level things. You could make a table that looks like a profile, but the magic of a profile is that it represents someone's experience with the system. And when you aggregate everybody's experiences together into one lump, you no longer are looking at an experience. You're looking at an aggregation of experiences. And I want you to put your eyes on the bottom of the slide as I change it. Basically, you're making a uniformity assumption if you believe that DB time profile for the system means that every task that you're executing must have that same profile. When in fact, and it's real easy to do this in Excel, you can prove this to yourself after the talk today if you want to. It's real easy for these things to have all different kinds of profiles, but have them average up into the exact same profile as before. Now, the only reason that this isn't the exact same profile as before, if you focus your eyes here and watch when I do that, there's an extra little chip that comes in, and there's some extra stuff that comes in on the legend on the right. These things called SQLnet message from client, SQLnet more data from client, are not typically things that you'll see in a system-wide profile created by these tools like OEM and Precise and Quest and all these other companies. The reason that they don't include these, you probably are all well aware of. You're taught this in your first DBA and tuning course, that these are you remember the name? Idle events. And when the database is idle, that means everything's cool. We don't have to worry about doing things because the database, after all, if it's not working, then it's not the database's fault that our things are slow. But When you look at payroll running and you see that almost half its time is consumed by SQLnet message from clients, this is a real story. This is a story that happened a couple days after the it's actually September 12th, 2001. I went to a client site and they had a payroll problem. And they literally were having a problem with their employees coming onto the premises and vandalizing the property because they were supposed to get paid on Fridays, but they weren't. They're getting paid early the next week because payroll was running so slowly, and they were pissed. So they were coming in with their pickups and their torches and pitchforks. It's kind of the image I had when they were talking about it, and they're tearing the place up. So the business problem in this place was payroll. Their system profile looked nothing like payroll looked. Payroll was literally half of its time spent doing SQLnet message from client things. And it ended up being a real simple configuration error to fix. They had gone through hell. They had their developers looking at payroll, trying to figure out why is payroll so bound up on latch-free, because on their system they had a big latch-free problem that showed up in their profiles. But payroll had virtually no latch-free whatsoever. So the ironic thing is, had they eliminated latch-free from the face of planet Earth, had they removed it from the product, payroll wouldn't have run any faster at all, because payroll wasn't doing latch-free. Back to Amdahl's law. So this system was heavily CPU bound because lots of other things were doing CPU things while payroll ran, but in fact a small slice of the payroll pie was CPU. So messing around with CPU wasn't going to help either. It wasn't going to help payroll either. These things in quantity, there might have been one of these running and 700 of these and 3,000 of those. All that added up, multiplied, turns into a profile that looks something like that, which may not resemble anything that runs on your system. So there's also a uniformity assumption in here as well, and it's the one that Bryn spotted before. It may not necessarily be that every payroll looks exactly like that. It may be that some payroll executions, maybe the middle of the month one, has a different profile than the one at the end of the month. So you have to watch out for this uniformity assumption as it re-arises throughout your analysis. So this was what payroll actually looked like. And on the system where payroll was running, latch-free was the number one Oracle wait event that was having time consumed against it. But as you can see, latch-free is only about 1.2% of the total response time for this payroll process. Now, what do? These things are idle. SQLnet message from client, SQLnet more data from client, they're idle events. We all learned that in DBA school, and we've all learned that we should ignore those. So, of course, what we need to do is call the people with the pickups and the pitchforks and the burning torches and explain to them carefully that, hey, it's all idle time. I mean, why are you upset? Our teacher tells us that everything's cool, so why are you burning the place down? Well, in fact, they don't give a rip about what your teacher said in class. They care that they're not getting paid on Friday. So what's really incumbent upon us is to figure out, well, what in the heck is this thing? It's the thing that people taught me not to pay attention to, but now I'm being told it's 50% of the time being spent causing the business to go up in flames. So we soon learn what it is. It's not very hard. It's when the database is waiting for somebody to make a database call, and this is how many times it did that during this half hour, and this is how long it took every time. And not to go into this diagnostic phase, but this was so easy to fix, I'll go ahead and tell you what we did. We noticed that looks like a local area network latency because this payroll program doesn't do a lot of processing after it pulls a row out of the database. It's a Pro-C program, and it just pulls a row and basically does very little to it and then moves on to the next row and pulls it. So we saw this 10 millisecond latency, which includes both the network traffic round trip and the client-side processing. We knew the client-side processing was negligible, so we thought, why in the world is a process that's connected to Oracle directly on the same Oracle box? The same Sun server is housing this so-called concurrent manager that the eBusiness Suite uses to run payroll, and it's sitting right there with the database on the same server. Why are we getting local area network latencies between the two processes? And we quickly found out by looking at the tnsnames.ora file that they had one alias called ORCL, which is the default out of the box, which they've been using for the 6 years they'd owned the system. And it was set so that the protocol adapter was TCP. And the reason they've done that is because they've got people on the 24th floor who are running some sort of application server application that have to connect to the database through TCP/IP. But the concurrent manager didn't have to connect through TCP/IP. It could have connected through this IPC protocol, which is much faster, saves a whole bunch of network code path between this process and that process on the same machine. So we recommended that they change their protocol through which the concurrent manager connected to IPC, and actually this is long enough ago, it was bequeath back then. And they said, no, we can't. Why not? Because we have these people on the 24th floor. We said, oh, you don't realize you can have multiple connection aliases in one tnsnames.org file. Oh, I didn't know that. And we did a little test, and then it ended up that we reduced this figure here by about 55 times by connecting the processes directly instead of through all this TCP/IP network software stack. And when we did that, this number became roughly 0. And that number became roughly half of what it was before, and everybody was happy and people stopped tearing up the place. So anyway, that's just an aside. The magic that we performed that day was really saying, can we look right at payroll? I know you've got this big screen with the pie chart that says latchery and blah, 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 but can we just look at the thing that's hurting, this payroll thing? Can we look at it and find out what it's doing? And we were given permission to look at it. So the thing that got them was skew. They assumed that there was uniformity in all the profiles on their system relative to the profile that their software was showing them for the whole system. So to predict an individual execution's speed up, you must know how that execution spends its time. It's Amdahl's law. It's always back to this Amdahl's law thing. So now let's predict a system speed up. You can see what's coming, right? We've already done this. So the new CPUs are 4 times faster. How much faster will the system be? A, the system will be 4 times faster? No, right? Because of that word system. There's no such thing as a system. Everybody looks at the system through the lens of the application that they use, and each application uses the system differently. So when DBAs say system, it's not the same concept as when a user says system. It's funny, you put 2 people in the same room and they both say system, and they go, oh, I know that word, that's in my language too. But the thought bubble above the DBA's heads is totally different than the thought bubble above the user's heads. And this is really important that you realize this. There's nothing you can say about the system because there is no such thing as a system. Yes, sir?
Could you just say it will probably be faster?
No, because for some people it won't be. Let me go back to this. This was a really, really interesting case, this payroll thing. The weekend before they called us, they spent the whole weekend with Sun engineers installing faster CPUs. They had, I forgot, they had 512 megahertz CPUs. This was back in 2001. And they upgraded over the weekend to 1 gigahertz CPUs. And they did tell everybody the system's probably going to be faster. We're spending all this money, we're spending all this downtime to upgrade CPUs. We've had it. We understand you guys are important to us. You need to get paid on time. So we're going to invest into faster CPUs. The reason they called us on Monday was because payroll went worse after the CPU upgrade than it had before. Now the reason it went worse is you can see what payroll had been doing. This is the after CPU upgrade. So you can see that the CPU time here is about 230 seconds or so. And before, this number was probably about 400 seconds or so. But CPU is not where this thing's time had been going. Now there are lots of other things on the system that were consuming CPU at the same time. That's how the pie chart for the whole system became so blue. So there are lots of things out there running CPU. So let's imagine that my hands here represent a timeline of some other thing, some book order, pick order, something that's not payroll. It used to take this long, and let's imagine that it was mostly CPU bound, but let's imagine that in this much duration, it did 10,000 network I/O calls. Well, now with faster CPUs, the amount of time it takes to complete that code path is less, but the code path didn't change. It's still making 10,000 network I/O calls. So what did upgrading the CPUs actually, in fact, do to the system? It saturated the network. because it made the distance in time between the network I/O calls even smaller than before, which caused more queuing at the network, which caused this number to probably be worse now than it had been before their CPU upgrade. So it's weird to people. I usually ask at conferences, how many of you have ever been through an upgrade where somebody complained that after the upgrade something was slower? And I'm not talking about an 11.202 to 11.203. I'm talking about you bought a bigger, faster hardware piece of machine that's the same brand, but it's got more CPUs in it, or it's got faster CPUs in it, and something got slower. And typically, 1 out of 20 at least will raise their hand. And then we tell this story and say, this is why. If your bottleneck, by the way, bottleneck isn't a system-wide term either. Bottleneck is a very personal task-oriented term, task execution-oriented term. The bottleneck is simply the top line in a profile for an execution. This execution's bottleneck was that. There's no such thing as the system's bottleneck because I've got different people running different things in different quantities of resource consumption. So I love that you asked that question, but the answer is, in fact, no, you can't even say you'll probably be faster because you might not be. But even still, I mean, what you're doing is you're fueling hope. It might be faster. Well, you know what? I'd just as soon you'd not even say anything. The world might end today. Well, that information's not really helpful. It sets me in the mind of thinking about the world ending, which...
Well, you could say it might be faster, but it won't get worse, and that was the lie.
But it won't get worse, yeah, is the lie.
But saying it might get faster implies it won't get worse.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you for clarifying. Where were we? Okay, we were going to predict the system speed up. We did this. I said, no. There's nothing you can say about the system because there's no such thing as a system. A system is this. A system is different people running different things, and those things that they run have different profiles. And once you sort of understand what I mean by profile, and I don't mean the SQL, plan type thing, then it's code that gets the message across really quickly. What's the profile say? And then you go, oh yeah, that thing. I got trapped by thinking in a system uniformity kind of a way. So I want you to remember this. Any performance improvement that you make will have a different impact upon each different task. And I really should say each different task execution. So this includes optimizing SQL, replacing a SAN, upgrading CPUs, changing parameters, adding indexes. All the things that you can do to improve a system will have different impacts upon different things. But it's easy for you to understand. If I had an index, it's going to have a different impact on this program than it does on that program. But also, if I add a disk to the system, it's going to have a different impact on this program than it will have on that program. So to predict a system speed up, you really need to do it one task at a time. And really by task, I mean execution. And what I really mean is one profile at a time. So it's fairly easy to predict a speed up. It's actually somewhat of a sinister example that I put up here, this 22.5-hour thing, because there's quite a bit of skew in this number as well, and I've got a whole nother presentation devoted to that, in which I asked the question, there are 10 million DB file sequential reads here. How much faster would this thing go if I could eliminate 5 million of them? And the answer ends up not being anywhere near half, because there are a small number of calls that are taking 95% of this total time. So there's skew everywhere. The world is just full of skew. Skew, by the way, is non-uniformity in a list. Excellent. We're going to have time for a little chat if you guys want to have one. So here's my wrap-up. Here's what I hope you remember out of this presentation. Use X or P to describe individual execution improvements. And X is defined this way and P is defined that way, where B is before and A is after. Please don't describe times measures as percentages. They sound great. This thing is 400,000 times faster. What does that mean? If I divide by 100, then I think what you're saying is that it's 4,000 times faster. Is that what you really mean? So if you stay away from percentages when you're describing times faster results, it makes it easier on everybody. And whatever you say about P or X, please also mention B and A, because that clarifies the whole thing. If that Windows XP ad had said, for example, running the Norton antivirus blah, blah, blah scan did take 2.3 hours before and then it took 0.2 hours after. Well, then I feel like they've fully disclosed correctly what they're talking about. Remember the ad that said it's 4,000, 2,000 times faster or 1,000 times faster? Then they actually would have scoped, what do you mean by system is? Well, this one thing we ran is faster. And by how much? Well, it used to run this long and it does run that long now. Britton, you look troubled.
No, I wasn't troubled. I was just going to say something.
Britton, you look pensive.
Yes, pensive, and now I've pensed. I feel a different emotional response to this word percent. It means the delta bit. If someone says, bad news, your pay rise this year is going to be 2%, you seem to feel it means that they've done what it will be and what it was, subtracted and expressed it that way. While if they say something is 5 of what it used to be, then that is the ratio.
Mm-hmm.
When they say it's 5,000% X, it seems to tell me that they're just...
Yeah, that's what it does to me too. But you guys would... It might actually make interesting reality TV to watch me and my kids watch television, the ads. Because when the ads come up, my 18-year-old has been so, he's so clipped into this notion that if you say the word percent, you're probably a douchebag, right? That's his whole thing in his head, is the word percent automatically means somebody is trying to trick me. And you watch these medical commercials, you watch these, commercials about cars and insurance rates, and we know the old trick about, oh, we're giving you a 10% pay cut. Oh, but next year we're going to give you a 10% pay rise. Well, that doesn't get you back where you were, right? There are all these tricks about percentages that are just slimy and wicked and evil. And they know these things because I've talked repeatedly about them. And we do these little exercises about, hey, what are they trying to accomplish? Well, it sounds really good, but if you actually do the math, which I think most people are either incapable or not interested in doing, then you get tricked. You get tricked. So I really dislike, when I see that percent symbol, it just is like, the guard goes up. All right, I don't trust you anymore. What are you talking about? Well, before it was this, after it was that. Okay, that makes sense. Now I understand, right? So that's what I mean by this. Whether you say X or P, if you say B and A, then you're cool, even if you do convert these things to percentages, because I can tell what's going on if you mention these. But if you leave these out, if you leave out the blue bit, I just don't know enough. The problem with fractions is that it conceals the denominator. Ratios hide the denominator's value from you. And that's a big problem. So remember this too, please. A system is a list of tasks. No single number can explain anything about that list unless that list's behavior, the profiles of the things running in that list are homogeneous, which they're not. And there's the key of it. No single number can describe a system performance improvement unless you happen to have the weird system that only does one thing. That's the example that breaks the rule. So I think we've covered all the nodes now. We've done the past and the future stuff. We actually have, this is really rare for me, we have 5 or 6 minutes to just talk. Here's some references. I'm actually carrying this thing around. Some of you may have acquired the old version of this book that was all white, didn't have the gray spine. Look at that. It used to be about half that thick. And now, just a month and a half ago, I think is when I released this. So there's a whole bunch of new stuff in there if you want it.
100% thicker?
It's 100% thicker, yes. It actually is almost exactly 100% thicker. Yes, it's also 200% thicker at exactly the same time. Thank you. The most fulfilling thing is when I know that people can confidently joke using material from my content. That means that you've got it. When I go to the men's room sometimes after at breaks in classes and somebody says, "Oh, we have head contention," and I go, "Yeah, they're getting it." Like I said, we've got this luxury. I've literally got 5 minutes left. Can we discuss something? Yes, sir.
Central tendency or confidence as
Yeah.
in the light of that figure you had on a couple of slides back that had about 18 digits of precision.
You mean
No,
this?
you just missed it. There you are. First on the line with total parentheses 27.
Mhm.
Maybe not quite. There are many digits of precision.
You're talking about this really
Yes.
ugly number here.
Yes.
Yeah.
The question brutally is why do you display it with so many digits?
Because normally these numbers are like 15 and 6. This is a
But
number.
the trailing digits don't change the emotional impact.
I know.
So that was the question.
This is a number of seconds from when somebody began tracing until they ended the trace, and the tracing on and tracing off were very carefully inserted into the code path to represent the exact moment in time when the experience began and the exact moment in time when the experience ended. And when I rendered this table, there is no automatic, remember I told you there's software that generates that. There's no automatic thing in the software that says if the number is this big, then only display this many digits to the right of the decimal point. There is a flag on the command line from which I ran the command to generate this that I could have said minus precision equals 2, for example, and then you would have seen 0.76. It would have rounded and left off the rest of it.
The implied question is if you repeated to the extent that you could make everything the same measurement, would you expect to see those 17 digits?
No.
No, and that's
No.
what's implied when it's shown to that precision.
I'll accept that, and the category I'm going to put it in is I should have used different arguments when I ran this report to generate this slide. But the default precision is 6 digits because that's what Oracle gives us. So this is exactly how long that thing took to the microsecond.
Scaling issue, isn't it?
Right.
Normally they are very small, these ones.
Right.
In this case, they are very big.
Exactly.
But I guess the larger point is when anyone says any number, even when it's 5x and it's crystal clear exactly what it's talking about,
Mm-hmm.
the question is, do you mean 5x plus or minus
Well,
0.1
right.
or 5x plus or minus 2?
right. You're talking about a sampling error problem. For example, if I run a report 20 times a day and I only trace it once before and then I only trace it once after and then I derive my 5x conclusion based on just that one pair of numbers, well, if I traced the number 17 yesterday instead of number 3, would maybe it have looked like only a 2.2x? And yes, so then we get into statistics and sampling and the whole story of, well, I really should have collected probably 15 or 20 befores and maybe averaged them or something, and 15 or 20 afters, or maybe not the average, but maybe and you start talking about the standard deviations and things like that, and that's a whole fascinating conversation as well. The thing that I would probably stop at would be to say, if you measured 20 and you took the worst one so that you could give the best number, that's probably a little sneaky, a little conniving. Normally what I find is that people don't have time to collect what you would consider from a statistician's perspective to be enough data. We just don't have time. We're trying to fix this and move on to the next thing. And how did you do? Well, pretty well. It used to run in about 15 minutes and now it runs in about 2 minutes. And here's my one data point where it ran in 15.726 minutes and now it runs in 2.057. So I think that the most important thing that you're putting in my mind is just don't be sneaky and like pack the numbers.
I have an entirely different question, if I may.
Yes.
I'm asked to judge the length of your presentation.
Eric, can you show that
Scale
card
1 to
again?
5.
Can you show that? Turn around and look at Eric, please. So in about 42 seconds, I'm going to say we're done, and you're going to put a 5 in that slot.
5, that's my question. 5 means it's perfect.
Yes, I think
5
so.
too long, 3 exactly right, and 1.
Oh, I don't know. No, I think it's 5 is perfect.
That's the question.
Let's go with that.
5 is perfect.
Just hold the pen like this and just make a big circle around all the 5s. Because I heard this was fantastic. Hey, thank y'all for coming. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.